Let's talk about the exclamation mark or exclamation point, which we use to show a strong sense of emotion. So an example would be with interjections, and interjections, if you recall, are a part of speech. And these examples of these would be ouch, or sorry, or wow, or alas and alack if you're really old-fashioned. And in each of these cases, you can use an exclamation mark to show that strong sense of emotion. Same thing with declarative sentences, so basically statements or descriptions. If you are surprised or you have a sense of pain or you're amazed by something, whatever the emotion may be, you can use that final exclamation mark. And then the last example of where we would use an exclamation mark would be with commands, also called imperatives. And if you say to somebody, fire at will, you can hear that with that strong sense of emotion, you can use an exclamation mark. Now that we know what exclamation marks are for, we can zoom in a little bit to some specific rules. And in the first case here, what we don't want to do is use too many exclamation marks with sentences that we're using in a formal or academic context. In the first example, clearly this is more colloquial speech, and you could say that was an awesome dunk, and the exclamation mark is perfectly fine. But in the second example, if you are writing in a formal context, then you don't want to dress up your writing with unnecessary exclamation marks because it's going to seem sensationalistic, as if you're not quite professional enough to write in this context. Let the words speak for themselves, and only in rare situations will the exclamation mark be necessary or appropriate. As mentioned, we can use exclamation marks with interjections as well, but here too, a little bit more nuance is appropriate. In the first example here, we have what's called a mild interjection. And because the expression is fairly mild, not a really strong sense of emotion, we don't need an exclamation mark. Whereas in the second example, stronger sense of emotion, the exclamation mark makes sense. This is a bit of a judgment call though, so if you were simply emailing somebody saying, oops, sent you the wrong email, no problem, let's move on, then maybe it's a mild expression. But if you really screwed up, maybe you want to say sorry, with an exclamation mark and change the tone a little bit. It's up to you really what tone you're trying to achieve with the exclamation mark. And so we get to our last point of discussion, which is how do you integrate that exclamation mark with other punctuation marks? In the first place here, what we see is that we've mistakenly added two final punctuation marks. And the general rule of thumb is that you don't want to double up punctuation marks. So the period can definitely go. But things get a little bit more tricky if we end with quotation marks. So let's pretend that this is actually a quotation that we are using here. And the quotation originally had an exclamation mark. Well, if we were to end right there, we would not add another period. But if we were to add a citation, so let's say this is from page 6, then the final period is appropriate. One other thing to think about is that if there was no exclamation mark at the end, so let's say that the quotation ended with a period, but you really want to add some emphasis, what you would do is not add the exclamation mark here. That would be incorrect. What you would do is you would just simply take out the final punctuation, add the citation, and then put the exclamation mark at the very end to show that it's part of your sentence and not part of the quotation. And then the final rule to observe is that in some cases we can break that rule that we should not double up punctuation. So for instance, if we have a title like the movie Oklahoma and it already ends with an exclamation mark, then in this case we could add the question mark for our sentence afterwards. Same thing with the abbreviation in the last example here. So the abbreviation has a period, but we also want that exclamation mark in this case for our sentence as a whole. If you find this awkward, and indeed it does look a little bit awkward, then just rephrase the whole sentence so that you don't have this problem.